So the iPhone 16 Pro Max and Pro were just announced yesterday at Apple's Glow Time event, and pre-orders are getting ready now for Friday. So in this episode, what I want to do is share with you my thoughts on which Max phones I think you should upgrade, or help you out to decide if these are worthy Max phones to upgrade to the iPhone 16 Pro Max this Friday. So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. As you can see, pre-orders start at 5 a.m. on Friday. This is going to be for PDT time. And you'll see they start at $11.99, so Apple didn't raise the prices. And they come in 4 different colors: Desert Titanium, Natural Titanium, which is the color I have here on the 15 Pro Max. And then you have Black Titanium, White Titanium. Of course, the max storage is going to be 1 terabyte for a price of $15.99. Now, keep in mind that the iPhone Maxes here in the US, all the iPhones here are eSIM only. Outside of the US, in certain countries, you will be able to get the SIM card tray for the 16 Pro Max. So not here in the US though. So that is something to keep in mind when you do upgrade. If you have an older phone with a SIM card, you will be going to an eSIM only. And one thing I want to make clear before we start with the first Max, as you can see in the reflection over here, this is my 15 Pro Max. This one's not on the table because this one is not going to be included, and I'll talk why more about that later. All right, we'll begin with number 1, the XS Max, the original gold beauty, and actually the introduction to the Max iPhone. This was after the iPhone 10, which was a no-brainer upgrade for having a newer design. Apple held back on bringing a larger model until the XS Max, which everyone was waiting for, and you've seen that lag. That's because I'm on an older version of iOS 18 beta. I do have to fix that and update this to RC, but this phone right here has some big time upgrades to the 16 Pro Max. If you're coming from this one, you have the older notch on here. You also have a silent switch, which most of these will have. The rounded design is kind of nice, but it is a very shiny and can get scuffed up corners. It's a smaller 6.5, so you're going up 0.4 inches to a near 7-inch display, 6.9 to be exact. And you're also going to be coming away from this older Lightning port, much improved audio, and massive leaps and bounds camera upgrades. You could even go to the 16 Plus and it would be a massive upgrade over this phone. But if you stick with the high end and you love your XS Max, this is probably the absolutely biggest upgrade. And ignore the chatter about people saying, oh, the newer 16 Pro Max is so similar to the old ones. They're talking about the past couple of years, 3 years or so. If you held on to this and you just skipped all of those, and you're now ready to upgrade, you could just ignore that chatter, because you are going to be getting some massive upgrades over your XS Max, and they're going to be a glorious change for you. 120 hertz, bigger battery. You're also going to get just a nicer build, a more premium, larger phone, better cameras. All around, it's just going to be a way better experience over this phone. And the 11 Pro Max is up next. Now, let me just make something very clear. This was one of my absolutely favorite iPhones ever made. It was the first time they brought an ultra wide, and I feel like Apple is trying to kind of redo the 11 Pro like year here, bringing a new way of using the camera. So when this one came out, the new way of using this camera was it introduced the ultra wide camera to the iPhone experience, which was a really big deal at the time, because you can never get that wide out shot on an iPhone with those dual cameras and the way those sensors were. They were just regular, standard, and telephoto. But this one brought telephoto and ultra wide, and it had really good 4K 60 video across the board. This was I feel like truly the first Pro iPhone. I mean, it was the first one they called Pro, but definitely felt pretty Pro for the time. Also, this green color option, the midnight green, was just absolutely stunning. However, this time to upgrade this one, I feel like, and I'll tell you why. The ultra-wide cameras are now 48 megapixels. So since the first introduction of the iPhone 11 Pro Max with ultra-wide, they're upgrading the ultra-wide camera. So it's the first time you're getting a higher megapixel count there. Also, the XS Max got upgraded here, but if you're going from the 11 Pro Max to the 16 Pro Max, you're now getting that new way of using the camera, just like you did if you came from the XS Max to this one, in the way of a capture button. So you'll be able to capture on the side here. This one also doesn't have 5G, which makes it a big upgrade if you held on to this. And the video quality is also better across all cameras. I actually think the 11 Pro Max is still so good. You could still use it today, but it definitely has slower 5G. It doesn't have 5G, so it has slower 4G performance. Its battery life is not as good as it used to be, although at the time this thing was phenomenal on battery life. But giving you the 48 megapixel across the board, the camera button, capture button, this is kind of reminding me of the 11 Pro Max when it was just a new way to use the camera on the phone. This is another big year for iPhone in that area. All right, moving on. So here's where it starts getting a little bit tricky, because this is when this generation of looking iPhone started looking pretty much the same with the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Since then, the iPhone is kind of looking the same ever since here. So this is where people are like, I don't know, it's kind of the same phone, but it's not quite the same phone here. I'll tell you why. The 12 Pro Max was not the best on battery. This was a charge every night, sometimes by 8 p.m., 9 p.m. at night. This wasn't my favorite on battery. Also was the first 5G iPhone, which was really good for the time. It also came out during the pandemic, and it was a really nice iPhone for the time. Brought in the square edges over here. The 6.7. This was the first 6.7 inch panel, but this has Lightning port. This also doesn't have any massive camera leaps over the 11 Pro Max, besides a little bit more zoom. You can go 12 times, but this is just weird, like a 2.5, like that's not even 3x or 5x. So much better zoom over this one. This one doesn't have dynamic island. It doesn't have always on display. It also has a 60 hertz refresh rate, which I really didn't like for the time, because it should have had a 120 hertz even at this time, but it didn't. So this is a big, beautiful phone with a slow refresh panel. I mean, I even think the Plus is better than this phone right here, even without having triple camera. So I'd trade this in for the Plus or the Max if I was being totally honest with you. The notch is also quite wide up here. Wasn't a fan of that, so that's making this look a little bit old as well. And it doesn't have no action button as well. This also doesn't have a capture button, but this is where the capture button will be integrated on the new phone. At the end of the day, this phone at the time was a nice change in feel versus the 11 Pro Max. But now it's getting to the point where, you know, this one had so many polishes and refinements. The 16 Pro Max is the ultimate version of the 12 Pro Max. It truly is. This might be the last time you see this generation design, and it went up to 6.9. So I think there's a lot of worthy upgrades here for over the 12 Pro Max to go to the 16 Pro Max. So I personally would do this upgrade from the 12 Pro Max. And those are some of my reasons why. But you don't have to. I think starting from the 12 Pro Max, you don't really have to. These are just my points as to why I think it's a solid upgrade. And Old Faithful. I call the 13 Pro Max Old Faithful, just Old Faithful and robust. This thing was probably the best iPhone ever in the Max lineup in terms of just an all-around beast. Great cameras, great battery life, super nice build, super fast refresh. There was just, you couldn't complain. Like, there's nothing to complain about with this product right here. There just wasn't a lot to just, you just can't go to town on it, really. I had to nitpick to find problems. The dynamic island is not here. We do have a notch, but it's a shorter notch. It's a little bit different than the 12 Pro Max. I kind of liked it a little bit more. I felt like I had a little bit more screen. You could finally see a little bit more stuff on the sides up there. Overall, you know, really good camera setup. And what I really loved about the iPhone 13 Pro Max was its consumer-oriented camera, in that the focus was always on point. It brought the macro mode, which was super easy to use. Also, ultra wide stays there. It had 15 times zoom, which was more usable than 12. In addition, it brought a cinematic mode. We had a great 4K 60, an amazing front-facing camera, which is still amazing to this day. 5G, beautiful stainless steel, durable. You could drop this thing and it doesn't crack super easily. It doesn't have an action button. SIM card tray, the last one in the US to have a SIM card tray. There just wasn't a lot to complain about here. But why do I think it's a good time to upgrade this? I'll tell you why. It's worth a good amount of money still, not a ton, but definitely worth enough to knock a good price off the 16 Pro Max. The next reason, I think the 16 Pro Max is going to be kind of like the 13 Pro Max, wherein that it's going to be robust, has really good battery life. There's not going to be a lot to complain about. It's going to be so good it's boring. That's kind of how I feel about this 16 Pro Max. Also, they improved the 48 megapixel across. This was a triple 12 megapixel setup here. The new one is a triple 48. So all three of your cameras are upgraded. And that would go for all of these as well. All three of your cameras are upgraded, which is a big deal. Also, this phone wasn't the brightest in sunlight. So the new one massively improved in brightness, and it doesn't auto dim kind of like the 14 Pro Max does. Also, this doesn't support Apple Intelligence. So while this is still a great phone, it's going to get iOS 18. There's not a lot of problems with it. It doesn't support Apple Intelligence. So for those reasons, I would probably consider the upgrade. If it's not in the budget though, and you just want to wait till next year, this is one I wouldn't be too upset with keeping either. So now we're getting into the category of it's a little bit tricky, starting with 12 Pro Max and up, but especially the 13 Pro Max. This is not a must, but there's definitely enough worthy changes that if you wanted to do the upgrade, it would be felt. So I don't know what it is about the 14 Pro Max. At the time, I was excited about the space black. I love the color option with the black edges, and I feel like they're kind of doing this with the new Apple Watch. They're trying to get you on the black color, but the space gray on the back looking in the black, I love this color option. But there was just something about this phone, it just wasn't my favorite. It wasn't overly exciting. I think it's because it just wasn't such a big change besides Dynamic Island over the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which was just so good. It's hard to follow that up and just make it so much better. And what actually happened was this phone had worse battery life than the iPhone 13 Pro Max. It also had this issue where if I was outdoors and I had it on auto bright, it would dim and I couldn't even see it outdoors. But there is one very big pro to the 14 Pro Max. It has great low light cameras and it's super durable. Like this thing, if you drop it on cement on the right angle, don't get me wrong, don't go dropping your phone on cement, but if you did, it probably could survive if it hit these stainless steel corners. So this thing was incredibly durable. That's one of the best things about it. One of the biggest cons though is I feel like for the time, see, this is where I feel like Apple's a little bit behind. I feel like they could have put 8 gigabytes of RAM back in these days, and they could have been at 12 gigs already on the newer iPhones, but that's just not the way things have gone down. This phone also had some battery degradation issues, and its camera wasn't a big improvement on the zoom over the iPhone 13 Pro Max. It did go 3x and 15 times. Also had cinematic. It brought more improvements to pro modes. But overall, and I think this one is the one that bought the action mode as well, so you can do smooth action panning video. That was a nice change. It's just this phone that didn't feel like a massive departure from 13 Pro Max. But the main reason, and I'll tell you the main reasons I would consider ditching this one. One, the battery health issues with this one. That's a main one for me. The second one is this phone is still worth a pretty penny. You can sell this for quite a bit still because it's got Dynamic Island. It's not super old. It's pretty high end. So you can get a big chunk of change off your 16 Pro Max. If you sell this thing third party or trade it in, you're getting a big chunk of change off of it. And it has 6 gigs of RAM, and it doesn't feel that old, but it's already dated because it has 6 gigs of RAM and cannot run Apple Intelligence. So for that reason, the 14 Pro Max is making my list. Even though that was a tough one to put on there, it's still not that old. It is making the list for upgrades. So these are all the iPhone Max devices that I think are worthy of an upgrade. And if you're noticing something, it's pretty much all of them except for last year's 15 Pro Max, which tells you one thing. The 15 Pro Max is the only one getting 8 gigs of RAM, Apple Intelligence. It's the only one that still feels pretty darn modern and you really have no reason to upgrade unless you just love upgrading every year, or you review phones like I do. Some channels will definitely upgrade just because they're going to review it. But other than that, regular people out there, this thing is still amazing. iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I don't think the 16 Pro Max is a must do. And I don't think it's a must do for these two either, but there are reasons to do it. But these right here, I feel like are must upgrades. 10s Max, 11 Pro Max, 12 Pro Max, those older ones, those are massive changes to go to the 16 Pro Max. So if you have any other questions, comments, concerns, drop them down below in the comments. Let's chat about this. Let's chat about these Max phones in the comments. I'll catch you on the next episode. Be sure to subscribe. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Be sure to be well, and peace.